rolling with Maudine today. Might be a show, Maudine. Rolling with Maudine. Got a call. We should have an accepted LOI on the deal. Might have another accepted LOI on a second deal, maybe. Another conversation. Broker's like, you want to go see this deal? I'm like, well, yeah. He's like, okay, it's $110 million-ish. Maudine's eyes lit up like this big. Like, whoa, that's a big one. So getting out there, we're looking at deals, and what I said is I'm like, I told Maudine, I'm like, dude, I looked at like a $50 million deal 2 years ago. I'm like, there's no way I could ever do this deal. But then what happened was then an $18 million deal came along, which, the $18 million deal normally would look huge, but after looking at the $50 million deal and diving deep into it and seeing what we needed for debt and seeing what we needed for equity, then the $18 million deal seemed small and so achievable. We went out and we closed that $18 million deal, right? Now it's like, okay, next level, next step. How do you grow? How do you push yourself? You go out and look at something bigger, $110 million deal, because then, a 65, 75, $85 million deal doesn't look quite so hard or insurmountable, right? Will we get the $110 million deal? Probably not. And that's why I just told the broker, I'm like, are we going to get this one? We probably won't. I don't know. I mean, unless I go and I really, 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 really love what I'm seeing and feeling and I get good vibes from it. And, if that really goes off and I really, really like the location and the area and everything, and we do the deep dive, it all works out, then yeah, I think we could find a way to make it happen. But, you don't know if you don't go look, and you're never going to grow if you don't go look, and you're never going to grow if you don't try to go and push yourself. Right? You've got to remove the invisible lid. Like, there's no actual cap on you. And the moment that you realize there's no actual cap on you is the moment that you become a lot more confident in what you're doing, and you realize, wait, I can go do this. And once you realize that I can go do this, that's when you will go do it, right? And so you just have to put yourself in those freaking uncomfortable moments, or just you have to be able to stretch your rubber band so far to the point of it breaking, or let it break and then go get a bigger rubber band, So that's what you got to do. And that's what I've always done. And that's what I'm going to continue to do. And eventually, what's going to happen is I'll go out and start just looking at straight 3,000 unit portfolios or 1,800 unit portfolios or whatever. And then it's going to make an 800 unit portfolio look tiny, right? So, and then, we've scaled up each time. We buy a $18 million deal and a $28 million deal and a $33 million deal. And so we're getting to the point where we can get into these bigger assets, and we're also shifting a little bit. We're looking at these LOIs we're looking at hopefully tying up today. The one that we do have tied up, the second one that we hopefully will get tied up, they're newer assets. They're only 7 years old, right? So we just closed on the 178 unit, almost 2 weeks ago, that is 10, 11 years old. And now we're getting to be in a spot where we're buying, newer assets. Some people look at the price per unit on the newer assets, and I'm just like, yeah, but you know what? You don't have to worry about some of these things you got to worry about in the buildings that were built in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. And on top of that, when you're looking at the spreads and the difference of what you're paying from buildings that were built in the 70s, 80s, 90s to what you're buying for something that was built 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 8 years ago, I'm starting to think and believe, and as we continue to operate these things, we're going to find out it's going to be completely worth that investment of paying a little bit more per door to get into these newer assets, especially as we head into, these next few years of, after the government has pumped in so many dollars into the system. I think that going to these new assets, even though on paper it might look like you have, especially the way I do things pretty conservatively on paper. I was looking at one deal we closed 2 years ago. I projected we're going to do year 8 numbers. We're going to do that probably year 3, right? So I'm pretty conservative. So especially being pretty conservative, the way that we're doing these numbers and doing the underwriting, being in these newer assets over these coming years as inflation ticks up, we're going to look back. I think we're going to look back and just be in such a better spot. So I'm going to start trading products that we have bought in the 70s and potentially getting out of them and start to get into newer things. Albeit one asset we have a 10-year loan on that has some big prepayment penalties that was built mid 70s or whatever, so we'll probably sit on that one for a while yet, unless there's a buyer that comes along and wants to assume the debt. Then we'll look at if they want to assume it, we don't have that big defeasance penalty, prepayment penalty, then we consider moving it. But that's kind of the mindset right now. Just excited, and I think that's how people can, if that makes sense, if you can push yourself, right now, if you have nothing and you're only looking at single family, go out and look at a freaking 8 unit, because you're gonna be like, oh my God, I'll never be able to do an 8 unit. Where am I gonna get the money? But then now you're gonna go back and look at a duplex, and you're gonna be like, oh, that's it? It's a duplex, that's it? So then if you're stuck at a 16 unit, freaking A, go out and look at a 100 unit. If you're stuck at, buying an 80 unit, 88 unit, like I was a couple years ago, freaking go out and look at, a 200 unit that's $35 million, $45 million. Go out and look at a $110 million deal. Go out and underwrite one of those portfolios that come across your desk that's a 2,000 unit portfolio. If you follow Berkadia or Cushman, Wakefield, or whatever that have some of those portfolios, go and underwrite that thing, look at it. Because then what's gonna happen is when you see the dollar amounts, you're gonna drop down to a different property like, oh, that's easy. You gotta stretch the rubber band, you gotta out jump your comfort zone, you gotta just push boundaries, push limits, and that's the only way you're never gonna grow just sitting where you're sitting right now. You're never ever gonna grow. You gotta look for the next thing. You have to look at something bigger. You have to look at something different. If you're gonna chill where you're at, you're always gonna be where you're at. If you're gonna chill where you're at, you're never gonna get over there. Does that make sense? That makes sense, Maudine?
Of course.
Fired up, dude. All right, let's go look at this next property.